FBI director pulled over by police and held at gunpoint, police officer jailed shortly afterwards. Welcome, dear viewers, to a story that defies belief, a story of power, betrayal, and unthinkable drama unfolding in the heart of America's justice system. Today, we delve into a startling encounter. An FBI director pulled over for a simple traffic stop, only to be held at gunpoint by a small-town police officer teetering on the edge of corruption. What began as a routine incident escalated into a life-altering confrontation, leading to secrets revealed, loyalties questioned, and justice served in the most unexpected ways. Prepare yourselves for a narrative packed with high stakes, dramatic twists, and a finale you won't see coming. Sit tight, this is a journey you will never forget. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. On a bright Tuesday morning in early September, the small suburban streets of Fairfax County, Virginia, buzzed with their usual routine. Parents dropped off children at schools named after local heroes, joggers weaved through wide sidewalks, and dog walkers exchanged polite nods under tree-shaded corners. Traffic was, as always, a steady hum on Lee Highway. Somewhere among the vehicles was a nondescript black Chevy Suburban, moving with unhurried purpose. No one suspected that inside this vehicle sat FBI Director James Jim R. Dawson, one of the most influential law enforcement figures in the nation. Dawson, a tall man with a calm demeanor, didn't particularly look like a top official for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Despite his dark suit, white shirt and tie, he was not accompanied by the usual retinue of official SUVs when he opted to drive himself that day. He often enjoyed these solo drives. It was one of the few times he could clear his head and consider matters away from the unending calls, emails, and urgent briefings that dominated his schedule. Yet, on that particular morning, something gnawed at him, a feeling that this day was going to be far from normal. He glanced in the rearview mirror, noticing a black and white Dodge Charger from the Fairfax County Police Department merging into traffic behind him. The officer at the wheel seemed intent, eyes fixed on the Suburban. For a second, Dawson's instincts told him to be prepared for something out of the ordinary. Little did he know how quickly routine could transform into an event that would send shockwaves through Washington, D.C. and beyond. FBI Director Dawson maintained the speed limit, turned on his signal at each intersection, and obeyed every traffic light to the letter. Years of training had honed his observational skills to an almost preternatural sharpness. Even so, he found it peculiar that the police cruiser, driven by Officer Anthony Tony Braxton, seemed to mimic his movements, trailing close behind. Braxton, a local patrol officer with a reputation for handing out tickets like candy, was in a foul mood that day. He was known around the station for his sharp temper and obsessive drive to meet what he believed were unofficial quotas. Rumor had it he liked to push boundaries. Whether those rumors were true or just the usual police station gossip, no one wanted to find out. Inside the cruiser, Braxton seethed with anger over a recent dispute with his commanding officer. Lately, he had been frustrated by a perceived lack of respect from his department, and in his mind, every driver on the road was an easy target to demonstrate his authority. Spotting the dark Suburban and noting its out-of-state rental plates from a fleet commonly used by federal agencies, he made a snap judgment. Someone was driving around in a car they likely didn't own. Perhaps an opportunity to flex his muscle, or maybe even unearth something bigger. Dawson glanced in the mirror again. The calm of his drive was slipping, his phone rang, and a staffer from the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C. began, rattling off reminders of an upcoming congressional briefing. Dawson responded with short, polite acknowledgements, but his concentration was elsewhere. The officer's presence behind him was too deliberate to ignore. He braced himself for what might be the simplest of traffic stops or something far more complicated. The moment came on a quiet stretch of road near a cluster of office parks, where tall glass buildings gleamed under the morning sun. Without warning, the cruiser's light bar erupted in blue and red strobes, accompanied by the short, piercing wail of a siren. Dawson's pulse quickened, and he immediately signaled to pull over, guiding the Suburban to a safe stop. Curious onlookers in nearby office windows paused in their routines, some raising blinds to see if there was an accident or a dramatic police chase. Nothing seemed out of place, just a lone black SUV and an impatient-looking patrolman stepping out of his cruiser. Officer Braxton adjusted his utility belt, the weight of his Smith & Wesson M&P sidearm pulling at his hip. He walked toward the Suburban with a swagger that screamed authority. One hand hovered near his weapon, a stance that was more menacing than the typical caution used during a traffic stop. Dawson, used to all sorts of high-pressure confrontations, felt a moment of acute tension ripple through his body. 1,000 thoughts fluttered through the FBI director's mind. Part of him wanted to call in backup, or at least notify the local precinct that they were detaining the director of the FBI. But a calmer voice inside reminded him that escalating this too soon could cause chaos. He decided to comply with whatever instructions came next, up to a point. Officer Braxton rapped sharply on the driver's window, his knuckles striking the tinted glass with an impatience born of arrogance. Dawson lowered the window just enough to communicate. "License and registration," Braxton barked, his voice tense, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Dawson offered a polite nod, retrieving his identification from the center console. "Certainly, officer." He handed over his driver's license, along with a government ID that, in bold letters, identified him as the director of the FBI. Braxton glanced at the government ID, but seemed unimpressed or pretended to be. Instead, he fixated on Dawson's driver's license. "James Dawson, huh? You realize you were swerving just a bit back there, correct?" The accusation took Dawson by surprise. He hadn't been swerving, or if he had, it was imperceptible. Yet he remained composed. "If I did, officer, the first sure it was unintentional. I'm also fairly certain I was maintaining the correct speed limit." "Is there a problem?" Braxton's jaw tightened. There was something in Dawson's calm that enraged him. He wanted to see panic, fear, something that would validate this stop. Instead, he got a measured respect from a man who exuded a quiet authority. But then Braxton dropped his eyes again to the government ID, eyebrows furrowing. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was fake. People had faked government credentials before, though rarely with such a direct claim of being the director. Nevertheless, Braxton's simmering anger cranked up a notch. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, Mr. Dawson," Braxton ordered, placing emphasis on the name rather than acknowledging the position. At that instant, Dawson's instincts flared. This was no ordinary officer. Something was off. There was a menacing glint in Braxton's eyes, a posture that suggested he might escalate things at the slightest provocation. Still, Dawson nodded, deciding to comply. This was the last chance for a peaceful resolution. Yet somewhere deep inside, he knew that line had probably already been crossed. Dawson opened the door carefully, stepping onto the sunlit asphalt with the ease of a seasoned professional who had encountered high-tension scenarios many times before. Yet, he could not remember the last time he had been on the receiving end of a police officer's unwavering suspicion. Braxton kept one hand near his holster, eyes flicking over Dawson's impeccably tailored suit, as though it were a disguise for some sinister secret. "Turn around and face the vehicle," the officer commanded. The Suburban's engine ticked softly as it cooled in the morning air, the only sound aside from Braxton's voice. The FBI director turned, placing his hands on the SUV's roof. He could hear passing cars whisper by, their drivers rubbernecking at the sight of a man in a suit being patted down by a police officer. But the passers-by had no idea who this man was, nor the magnitude of the standoff unfolding. Braxton patted him down, found nothing out of the ordinary, and then, in a move that defied protocol, yanked Dawson's arms behind his back. Dawson resisted the urge to respond with force, even though he had the training to disarm the officer in a heartbeat. He sensed the potential for catastrophic misunderstanding if he dared. Instead, he tried reason. "Officer, if you'll just take a moment to verify my identification," Dawson began. But before he could finish, Braxton shoved him forcefully against the Suburban. Shock and anger flashed through Dawson, yet he remained outwardly calm. "Hands where I can see them," Braxton shouted, stepping back and reaching for his weapon. Everything moved in slow motion for a split second as Dawson registered the click of the holster snap. Braxton drew his gun and aimed it squarely at Dawson's back, finger nervously on the trigger. The world seemed to hold its breath. Dawson, pinned against the vehicle, fully grasped the danger. It only took a fraction of a second for a bullet to leave the barrel of that Glock, fueled by an officer's paranoia or rage. He cursed the day's fate for bringing him face to face with a dangerously unstable cop. Yet, in that moment, a resolute calm descended upon him. He would not be the one to ignite the spark that could lead to tragedy. One false move, and he would be the unarmed suspect whose identity meant nothing in a fraction of a second. Silence lingered, thick and suffocating, as the confrontation reached a dangerous pinnacle. All it took was a single voice to break the spell. A civilian in a nearby car, seeing the odd tableau, a well-dressed man forced against an SUV at gunpoint, decided to call 911. More calls flooded in from onlookers in the office buildings, some capturing the scene on their smartphones. In an era of viral video controversies, this had all the makings of a media firestorm. But the immediate effect was more localized. Suddenly, the Fairfax County Police dispatch radio crackled to life, multiple voices demanding status updates from Officer Braxton. Reinforcements were on the way. Braxton barked into his shoulder radio, "I've got a suspect refusing to comply," which was a blatant lie. Dawson had complied at every step. Dawson could hear the frantic chatter on Braxton's radio and wondered if anyone at the local station realized who James Dawson actually was. His official government ID alone should have raised alarms. The tension in the air became almost visible, like heat waves trembling over asphalt in the midday sun. Then Braxton made a critical move. He pressed the barrel of his Glock against Dawson's back. This was no longer standard police procedure, not even close. Dawson's mind roared with possibilities. Should he spin around, disarm the officer, and risk being shot in the attempt? Or would backup officers arrive and escalate matters further before discovering his real identity? Time crawled. Dawson gritted his teeth, focusing on controlling his breathing. He knew that the next few seconds could shape the outcome, not just for him and Officer Braxton, but for the entire local police department and possibly the FBI itself. Because if gunfire broke out, the headlines would be cataclysmic. A swirl of chaos threatened to consume them both, and they stood on the brink of making national news for all the wrong reasons. Just as the standoff threatened to tip into unthinkable violence, another police cruiser slid onto the scene, sirens blaring. This time, it was Officer Rebecca "Becky" Hayden, a veteran of the Fairfax County Police with more than 15 years on the force. Known for her steady composure, Hayden parked behind Braxton's cruiser and jumped out. Hayden took one sweeping glance at the situation, Braxton's trembling hand on the trigger. Dawson pinned against the SUV. She could see the ID on the ground, the laminated surface glinting in the sun, half covered by a faint breeze that threatened to blow it away. Kneeling quickly, she picked up the FBI credentials and scanned them. Her eyes widened. "Braxton, stand down," Hayden yelled, voice cracking the tension like a lightning bolt. "He's the FBI director." "That's James Dawson, for God's sake." For a moment, Braxton looked as if he'd been slapped. He froze, confusion ravaging his features. The name obviously rang a bell, but his pride warred with logic. He'd cornered himself in a position that would be hard to explain or justify. Dawson felt the gun barrel ease off his back. Braxton still didn't holster his weapon, but the menacing pressure subsided. Officer Hayden rushed to Dawson's side, helping him turn around carefully. The relief coursing through Dawson's veins was palpable, but he also fought a rising anger. "Are you okay, sir?" Hayden asked, concern etched on her face. Dawson nodded, adjusting his suit jacket. He eyed Braxton, who still had the weapon out but pointed at the ground now. "That remains to be seen, Officer Hayden." Braxton remained silent, breathing heavily, aware that other patrol cars were arriving, that the eyes of bystanders were on him. He started to piece together the consequences. If this was truly the director of the FBI he'd just held at gunpoint, things could go south for him faster than a bullet leaving the barrel. Yet, in that fraught moment, Braxton had no idea that the chaos unfolding would be merely the beginning of a chain reaction, one that would trigger revelations, investigations, and a day of reckoning. Minutes later, a small fleet of police cruisers had formed a perimeter around the scene, their flashing lights casting an eerie strobe across the glass facades of the office buildings. Dawson watched with mixed emotions as higher-ranking officials from the Fairfax County Police Department arrived, including Captain Lillian Martinez, who wasted no time trying to defuse the situation. Captain Martinez approached Dawson and extended a respectful hand. "Director Dawson, please accept our apologies," she said, her voice tinged with dismay. "Let's talk inside, somewhere more private. We've reserved a conference room at the station." Dawson took a measured breath, nodding. "I appreciate that, Captain. But first, I'd like you to confiscate Officer Braxton's weapon." Martinez hesitated only for a moment, then nodded to Hayden. With a stern look, Hayden relieved Braxton of his sidearm, placing it into an evidence bag. Braxton looked aghast, as though the ground were dropping out from under him. In the background, a flurry of activity consumed the scene, photographs taken, witness statements recorded, camera phones capturing every angle. The man at the center of it all, James Dawson, did his best to remain calm. This was a public relations nightmare in the making. He had no intention of burying the situation, but neither did he want a public spectacle that could undermine law enforcement credibility at a national level. As they escorted Dawson to his Suburban, he spotted a cluster of onlookers whispering, phones pointed. The FBI director couldn't help but wonder whether some unscrupulous individual might have recognized him, uploading pictures to social media to spark sensational headlines. There was no turning back now. A maelstrom had begun, and its force was about to sweep them all along. Upon arrival at the Fairfax County Police Department, Dawson was offered a private seat in a quiet conference room typically used for local interviews. The walls were beige, the furniture standard-issue government style, and a single photo of the county's earliest police force from the 1930s hung crookedly near the door. The atmosphere crackled with tension as Captain Martinez sat across from Dawson, trying to maintain a professional calm. Officer Braxton was conspicuously absent, having been led away to a separate area. He looked pale, sweat beading on his brow, as if his world was unraveling piece by piece. His colleagues, who ordinarily would have stood by him, seemed to keep a cautious distance, waiting for clarity on this extraordinary situation. "Director Dawson," Martinez began, "you have our deepest apologies. Officer Hayden has already submitted a preliminary statement indicating that your identification was in order." "Thank you," Dawson replied, voice measured, "but I'm less concerned with an apology and more concerned with how this happened in the first place." Martinez cleared her throat. "I'm ordering a full internal investigation, effective immediately. Braxton is on administrative leave until we sort this out. It goes without saying that threatening an unarmed civilian with deadly force under questionable pretenses is grounds for potential termination. And once we confirm your identity through the channels we've reached out to, additional steps will likely follow." Dawson nodded, then paused. "I'm concerned about more than a single officer on a power trip. The behavior I witnessed suggests Braxton felt he could operate with impunity. That begs the question, is there a broader cultural issue within this department?" The words landed heavily in the small conference room. Martinez's expression tightened with worry. "We'll take a thorough look, Director," she offered quietly. Deep in Dawson's gut, a new determination took root. This wasn't just about personal vengeance or punishing a rogue cop. It was about integrity and accountability, elements essential to the bond between law enforcement and the public. One way or another, he intended to shine a light into every corner of the situation until he uncovered the truth. Even as Dawson spoke with Captain Martinez, calls surged between the Fairfax County Police Department and the FBI's headquarters. Senior officials scrambled to confirm the bizarre news that their director had been held at gunpoint by a local officer. Typically, the FBI maintained a cooperative relationship with local law enforcement, offering support and coordination on federal cases. Now that collaboration teetered on a precarious ledge. Meanwhile, Dawson's phone buzzed incessantly with messages and calls from FBI subordinates, White House liaisons, and even a few senators who somehow got wind of the incident. The gravity of the situation was evident. If not handled properly, the story could spiral out of control, damaging both local and federal reputations. Seated in the station's conference room, Dawson offered statements to a pair of internal affairs investigators. He described the sequence of events in detail, making sure not to gloss over any specifics. Occasionally, he would pause, replaying certain moments in his mind, the weight of the gun pressed against his back, Braxton's hostile tone, the fear of a fatal misunderstanding. That fear now fueled his resolve. Outside, the hallways bustled with officers, exchanging anxious looks, whispering rumors. Some were outraged by Braxton's behavior, while others wondered if the director had somehow provoked the situation. Yet no one had any real evidence to suggest Dawson did anything beyond driving the speed limit. The tension was thick enough to choke on, and no one knew exactly how the day would end. In the midst of it all, Dawson's mind flickered to the question of whether Braxton's aggression was purely personal or part of some deeper rot. He had no intention of walking away without answers. The moment of confrontation was over, but the real battle, the search for truth, had only just begun. It didn't take long for rumors to swirl. Within hours, local news outlets picked up whispers of a high-profile traffic stop gone wrong in Fairfax County. Reporters called the police department non-stop, each seeking a sensational scoop. Even the big networks caught wind of the commotion. But due to Dawson's influence and a tight-lipped press strategy, the full details had yet to explode across national headlines. Inside police headquarters, the tension escalated further. Officer Braxton sat in a small interrogation room. His badge and credentials were taken, his gun seized. He sipped a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee, eyes darting around nervously. An internal affairs officer stood opposite him, arms folded across his chest. "You drew your weapon on an unarmed man," said the investigator, his tone grave. "Why?" Braxton swallowed. He thought about lying, claiming suspicious behavior, but he knew the video from his dashcam could betray him. Instead, he tried a half-truth. He was swerving, I suspected he might be under the influence or armed. Then he refused to lower the window fully. The investigator's skepticism was obvious. According to statements from Officer Hayden and various witnesses, Mr. Dawson, excuse me, Director Dawson, complied with every instruction. He offered his ID. He showed no aggression. Braxton's face paled. He shifted uncomfortably, hating the spotlight turned on his actions. He was too calm. Something felt off. The investigator's gaze hardened. You threatened a man at gunpoint because he was too calm? Braxton said nothing, jaw clenched. He was cornered. Despite the immediate internal inquiry, a deeper sense of dread coiled in his gut. If the FBI got involved in a federal capacity, he might be staring at criminal charges. His mind spun with self-preservation. In a desperate attempt to cling to a lifeline, he wondered if anyone on the force would help him, or if they'd cast him aside to save their own reputations. Little did he know, the actual reasons behind his brazen behavior were far more sinister than mere impulsiveness, and they were about to unravel in the days ahead. Meanwhile, after several hours of questioning and formalities, Dawson was finally permitted to leave Fairfax County Police Headquarters. Captain Martinez personally escorted him out, apologizing yet again for the ordeal. Dawson said little, choosing to remain stoic, though a maelstrom of thoughts swirled within him. He climbed back into the Suburban, which had been inspected and cleared, feeling the quiet hum of the engine beneath him. Casting one final look at the imposing grey building behind him, he pulled away, heading toward the interstate that would take him back into Washington, D.C. The drive felt surreal. He replayed every second of the encounter, Braxton's menacing voice, the muzzle of the gun pressed into his back, Hayden's urgent shout to stand down. It was a moment that would likely burn in his memory forever. He dialed Deputy Director Samuel Rains, who had called him nearly a dozen times since morning. As soon as Rains picked up, Dawson relayed the basics. "I'm safe," he assured his second-in-command, but this was deeply troubling. "I want to initiate a thorough investigation. We can't ignore an event like this. It points to something broken." Rains concurred, mentioning that the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility had been alerted. Both men agreed that going nuclear on the local PD, without all the facts, could be inflammatory. Still, they had to ensure accountability. By the time Dawson reached his home in northwest D.C., the sun had dipped, painting the sky in bruised orange and purple hues. He parked in the driveway, exhaling a tired sigh. There was no immediate sense of victory or resolution. Instead, it felt like stepping across the threshold into a storm that had only just begun to gather strength. That night, Dawson paced the living room of his stately brick residence, the soft glow of overhead lights illuminating the elegantly framed photos of family gatherings and official ceremonies. His wife, Caroline, an attorney well-versed in both corporate and civil law, looked on with concern. "Jim," she said gently, "you went through something truly terrifying. But knowing you, I suspect you sense there's more behind it than a simple act of police misconduct." Dawson nodded, running a hand through his greying hair. Braxton's aggression was far beyond standard procedure. I've encountered overzealous cops before, but this was different. It felt almost personal. Caroline took his hand, guiding him to sit on the plush leather sofa. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I can't explain it entirely. The way he approached me, it was like he was looking for an excuse. And when Officer Hayden arrived, the look on his face, he wasn't just angry, he was desperate. A sense of unease tightened the air around them. Caroline, ever the analytical mind, tapped her chin thoughtfully. Could Braxton be tangled in something bigger? Possibly. Dawson shrugged. Or maybe he's just that reckless. Either way, I'm ordering a quiet background check on him first thing in the morning. Caroline nodded, concern still evident in her eyes. And the department's official stance? Dawson sighed. They're sorry, of course, but I want to find out if he's connected to something more widespread corruption, a power ring, something. It's a hunch, but I can't ignore it. In the hush of the living room, their conversation cast shadows of fear and uncertainty. For an FBI director who had uncovered cartel networks, terrorist cells, and white-collar crime rings, the threat that lingered behind a lone officer's actions felt disconcerting, like the first drop of rain before a deluge. Little did Dawson realize how deep the rabbit hole would go, and how personal this would become, not just for him, but for everyone close to him. Sleep did not come easily. Dawson lay awake, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling in the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the bedroom curtains. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the gun, felt the cold muzzle digging into his back. He rose before dawn, heading to his home office to begin the background check on Officer Anthony Braxton. Utilizing secure FBI databases, Dawson initiated a quick but comprehensive search. After half an hour of scanning records, he saw nothing that jumped out. Braxton's file was standard hired. 4 years ago, good scores at the academy, a few citations for valor, a minor disciplinary note for excessive force, which had been resolved internally. Nothing conclusively damning. But Dawson's instincts told him that the official records might only scratch the surface. People with something to hide were often adept at cleansing their public file, especially if they had allies in positions of authority. Before heading to the Hoover building, Dawson fired off a message to Special Agent Paula Whitmore, a trusted investigator with an uncanny ability to sniff out hidden truths. He requested a deeper dig into Braxton's financials, personal associations, and known associates within the department. As the early morning sun stretched over the horizon, Dawson felt a knot of tension coil in his chest. He knew well how easily local corruption could entangle with federal matters. A single spark in the wrong place could ignite a blaze that consumed careers and lives. With a last sip of coffee, Dawson grabbed his keys and headed out. The day was beginning, and with it, the quest to uncover the secrets behind a routine traffic stop that was anything but routine. FBI headquarters at the J. Edgar Hoover building hummed with activity like a beehive on overdrive. Dawson walked in, the usual greetings from staff hushed by the swirl of rumors. Word of his dangerous encounter with Braxton had spread through the agency's corridors. Agents and administrators wore grim expressions, nodding sympathetically as he passed. In the secure briefing room, Dawson met with Deputy Director Rains, General Counsel Iris Chen, and the head of the Criminal Investigative Division, Charles Green. The tension around the table was palpable. Chen cleared her throat. "Director, we've had inquiries from the media. So far, the department is calling it a miscommunication pending the outcome of their investigation." She paused, adjusting her glasses. "They don't want this getting out of control any more than we do." Green nodded. "Should we open a federal civil rights investigation, sir?" Dawson considered it. "Let's hold off on going public with that, but start it quietly, off the record. If there's a pattern of misconduct, we need the evidence." "I don't want to fan the flames without reason." Rains chimed in. "Also, Braxton's personal finances and calls are being looked into as we speak. Our folks in Cyber Division are on it." Dawson laced his fingers, leaning forward on the polished conference table. "Good. The longer we wait, the more time the corrupt, if there are more involved, will have to cover their tracks." They spent the next hour hashing out plans, careful to keep the circle of knowledge tight. Dawson was determined to see justice done, but he also recognized the precarious politics. Fairfax County Police had been a cooperative force historically, with their fair share of good officers. Wielding the FBI hammer without subtlety could create unnecessary friction, driving the real criminals deeper underground. After the meeting concluded, Dawson stepped out, heading to his private office. Each step echoed with the weight of an unfolding crisis that threatened to escalate in ways no one had foreseen. Special Agent Paula Whitmore worked with single-minded focus, typing away in a restricted access computer lab. Having received Dawson's directive, she approached the investigation with her trademark diligence, cross-referencing Braxton's financial records, phone logs, and even social media footprints. At first glance, Braxton's bank statements showed typical deposits from his police salary, a mortgage for a modest home in Springfield, Virginia, and routine expenses, grocery stores, gas stations, an occasional restaurant. But as she dug deeper, an inconsistency cropped up. The mortgage payments occasionally spiked, indicating he was paying far more than required in certain months. Paula frowned. In her experience, that hinted at a sudden influx of funds. She widened her net, scanning for possible under-the-table income. Then she saw it. A series of questionable deposits from a shell entity named Vanguard Security Consultants that had no official web presence. Braxton had received at least 3 lump sums from them in the past 6 months. Curiosity piqued, Paula dove into public records to see if Vanguard Security Consultants was a legitimate operation. The search turned up nearly nothing beyond a PO box in Arlington. Suspicious. She quickly cross-referenced the PO box with known addresses used by local criminal networks or corrupt officials. Nothing yet. A phone call came in on Paula's dedicated line. She picked up, hearing the measured voice of Deputy Director Rains. "Find anything?" he asked. "Potentially," Paula replied, "but I need more time to follow the money trail." Rains was silent for a moment. "Do it quickly and quietly. The director wants answers as soon as possible." Paula hung up and refocused on her screen. Something in her gut told her she was only scratching the surface. If Braxton was funneling unaccounted income, it might link him to corrupt practices or payoffs. The bigger question, who was paying him and why? Late that afternoon, Dawson learned that Braxton had been officially suspended pending the internal investigation. Fairfax County authorities had taken custody of his service weapon, and his name had been removed from the active roster. The local press covered the story in broad strokes, labeling it an incident involving a local officer and a federal official, but with no direct mention of Dawson or the FBI. Dawson, however, sensed the calm before the storm. He could picture the headlines if the full details leaked. FBI director held at gunpoint. Public trust in law enforcement would nosedive, fueling endless debate on cable news and social media. Every step he took now had to be measured, each action carefully weighed against its potential fallout. Yet he refused to bury the incident. Some aides had discreetly suggested that it might be best to quietly settle matters, accept official apologies, and let the local system handle Braxton. Dawson rejected that approach. Lives were at stake if Braxton represented a bigger ring of corruption. Letting it slide could have dire consequences. That evening he sat in his office, reviewing the preliminary reports from Paula Whitmore and the internal FBI team. His eyes narrowed at the mention of Vanguard Security Consultants and the questionable funds in Braxton's accounts. A theory began to form. Braxton might be compromised, using his badge as leverage. Dawson made a note to contact federal prosecutors he trusted, ensuring they were prepared for a potential corruption case. He also requested a thorough review of any unsolved incidents involving Braxton. If there were patterns of extortion, bribery, or harassment, he wanted them uncovered. As he left the Hoover building, the gravity of it all pressed upon him. The day had started with a harrowing gunpoint encounter. It was ending with a deepening suspicion that the entire situation was no coincidence. In the hush of the night, Dawson steeled himself, ready to face the darkness that lay ahead. The next morning arrived with the promise of progress. Paula Whitmore's preliminary findings landed on Dawson's desk by 8 o'clock sharp. He scanned the details. Braxton had connections to a cluster of individuals tied to shady private security outfits. Not all were proven illegal operations, but enough red flags popped up to merit further digging. Among them was a rumored network bridging local law enforcement, unscrupulous bail bondsmen, and certain under-the-table consulting gigs. The puzzle pieces started to form a picture. Braxton could be part of a pipeline that manipulated traffic stops, arrests, and forced payoffs. If a driver didn't comply, they faced trumped-up charges. The hush money fed into shell companies. The arrogance and aggression Dawson witnessed might not have been a one-off display of bravado, but part of a pattern. Dawson's heart pounded. If the local police department was compromised by a ring of extortionists, they had to move fast. He dialed a secure conference call with Rains, Paula, and Charles Green. "We need to set a trap," Dawson said bluntly. Green agreed. "We can't storm in without clear evidence. Braxton is suspended, and if he feels cornered, he might run or worse, erase crucial leads." Paula chimed in. "We should consider an undercover agent or a sting operation. We know Braxton's associates might be trying to protect themselves now." Dawson nodded. "Exactly. Paula, you'll keep pulling the financial threads. Charles, coordinate with the local Point U.S. Attorney's office. We'll need warrants. And Rains, handle the departmental coordination quietly. If anyone in Fairfax County PD is in on this, we can't let them tip off the suspects." The call ended, leaving everyone with tasks that carried enormous risk. If a corruption ring existed, they might have allies in high places. That could endanger not only the operation, but also the personal safety of Dawson and his team. Yet the director felt a surge of renewed purpose. Getting held at gunpoint had been terrifying, but if that event led them to expose a malignant system, then perhaps a strange sort of justice could be served. As the FBI ramped up its quiet investigation, Braxton found himself in a personal hell. Stripped of badge and gun, he spent his days pacing his modest home in Springfield. The phone calls from Vanguard security consultants and others dried up abruptly, leaving him feeling abandoned. Late one evening, he received a blocked call. Picking up, he recognized the gravelly voice of Vince Corliss, a man rumored to be the silent partner behind Vanguard. "You idiot," Vince hissed. "You pulled over the FBI director, of all people. Do you realize the heat you've brought on us?" Braxton swallowed hard, every muscle tense. It was a chance encounter. "I didn't know who he was." "Chances don't matter," Vince snapped. "We pay you to be smart, to bring us easy marks. Now the entire force is on alert. The feds are sniffing around. You better keep your mouth shut or you'll end up in a deeper hole than you can imagine." The call ended abruptly, leaving Braxton trembling. He was no stranger to bending rules for profit, but the magnitude of this fiasco was unprecedented. Cornered and alone, he couldn't see a way out that didn't end with him behind bars or worse. Outside, a car passed slowly on the quiet suburban street, its headlights illuminating Braxton's drawn blinds. He peered through a crack, imagining FBI agents lurking everywhere, waiting for him to slip up. Perhaps he was paranoid, but with good reason. He was on the cusp of losing everything: his career, his livelihood, and maybe even his life if he crossed the wrong people. Little did Braxton know, events were already in motion that would ensure his downfall arrived far sooner than he expected. In a way neither he nor his co-conspirators could have predicted. Back at headquarters, Special Agent Whitmore made a breakthrough. She discovered that Vanguard security consultants had multiple shell companies connected to a known money launderer named Donovan Pierce, a figure on the FBI's radar for years, but never successfully indicted. The deposits to Braxton's account matched a pattern seen in other corrupt law enforcement cases. Paula wasted no time sharing this with Dawson, who instantly recognized Pierce's name. We tried to nab him for racketeering a few years back, but he slipped away on a technicality, Dawson recalled, frustration evident in his voice. Now it made sense. Braxton was likely involved in a pay-for-protection scheme, orchestrating dubious stops or arrests for a cut of the profits. Possibly the ring extended to other officers, maybe even city officials. The question was, could they collect enough evidence to bring down the entire network? Dawson authorized a covert operation to surveil Braxton's known associates and track any digital breadcrumbs. In collaboration with the local U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI also prepared sealed indictments for key figures, pending the final pieces of incriminating evidence. The stakes couldn't be higher. If word leaked, the operation might crumble. Yet Dawson felt a sense of destiny about it. Being held at gunpoint might have been the catalyst, but the real story was bigger and far more dangerous, a snake pit of corruption that threatened the integrity of law enforcement itself. As night fell, the director remained in his office, eyes scanning the city lights through the window. He knew that once they moved, it would be swift and decisive. The clock was ticking for Braxton, Pierce, and anyone else entangled in their shadowy web. Days later, Braxton finally left his house for a secret meeting with Vince Corliss. They chose a dingy, underlit parking garage near Arlington, a place frequented by hush-hush dealings. Braxton, anxiety etched into every line of his face, slipped out of his car, scanning his surroundings. Corliss stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He was a tall, burly man with a weathered face, wearing a dark jacket that concealed who knew what inside. "Good. You came alone," Corliss muttered. Braxton nodded, swallowing hard. "Look, Vince, I'm in trouble. The feds are onto me. They've got my finances, phone records, everything. I need help." Corliss's gaze was ice cold. "We paid you to keep a low profile, but you went and pulled a gun on the FBI director." "That was a mistake," Braxton began, but Corliss cut him off. "We don't tolerate mistakes. Donovan is furious. He wants to know if you'll rat us out to save your own skin." Braxton felt the weight of those words. He understood the warning, step out of line, and you're as good as dead. But desperation drove him to plead, "I just need to vanish, at least until the heat dies down. Donovan can get me an exit plan." Corliss scoffed. "No one's going anywhere. Too much risk. You stay put, you keep quiet, and you make sure your story lines up if the feds question you. Otherwise." He let the threat linger in the stale air of the parking garage. Braxton bit his lip, nodding shakily. He turned to leave, heart thudding in his chest. Little did either man realize that hidden cameras installed by the FBI had just captured every word. High above in a parked van, two agents watched the live feed. The evidence was piling up nicely. They signaled their success to the base of operations, inching the net tighter around Braxton and his associates. Soon enough, there would be no escape. Armed with the new footage and a mountain of financial evidence, Dawson and his task force drew up a decisive plan. Working in tandem with the local U.S. Attorney's Office, they prepared warrants for Braxton, Corliss, Donovan Pierce, and several other complicit individuals. The operation, codenamed Clean Sweep, was slated for the upcoming Wednesday at dawn. Agents were briefed in a secure facility outside D.C. They reviewed layouts of possible hideouts, safe houses, and the key suspects' known routines. Every detail mattered, as even a slight misstep could lead to a dangerous confrontation or tip-off. Dawson supervised the operation personally, determined to see justice done. The atmosphere in the briefing room crackled with anticipation. Some agents murmured about how the entire investigation sprang from the improbable scenario of the director himself being victimized. "It's ironic," one agent noted. "They messed with the wrong guy." Dawson overheard and felt a pang of gratitude amidst the tension. A single reckless traffic stop had set the stage for dismantling a network that preyed upon innocent citizens. Fate worked in mysterious ways, weaving threads of coincidence into the fabric of justice. By midnight, every piece was in place. Dawson headed home for a few hours of restless sleep, though his mind stayed fixed on the mission. Tomorrow, the corrupt ring would learn the cost of underestimating the FBI and the unstoppable force of truth. The morning air was crisp, a pale glow illuminating the suburban sprawl of Northern Virginia. At precisely 5:00 a.m., teams of FBI agents in unmarked vehicles fanned out, converging on multiple target locations simultaneously. The operation needed to be swift, synchronized, and overwhelming. One team arrived at Braxton's residence just as the first birds began to chirp. Decked in tactical gear, the agents approached cautiously. When they knocked, Braxton peered out the window, eyes wide with horror. He knew the jig was up. Within moments, the door was breached. Agents found Braxton cowering near his living room couch, hands in the air, pleading for mercy. They secured him without incident, reading him his rights. Elsewhere, Corliss attempted to flee a low-rent motel in Alexandria when agents arrived. He dashed out the back door, but an FBI perimeter team quickly tackled him. Meanwhile, at a lavish penthouse in Georgetown, Donovan Pierce woke to the sound of shattered glass and shouted commands. Before he could reach for a hidden pistol, a well-trained agent pinned him to the floor. By 6:30 a.m., the operation had concluded without a single shot fired. Over a dozen individuals were taken into custody, along with evidence that promised to unravel an entire network of corruption. Guns, cash, documents, and electronic devices were seized. The FBI had laid bare the core of a conspiracy that thrived on extortion and deceit, pulling in unsuspecting citizens and low-level criminals alike. For Director Dawson, the morning represented vindication and relief, but the day's events were far from over. Justice would take time, requiring court proceedings, depositions, and a public reckoning. Yet, as the sun rose higher, he felt a sense of closure that, for the first time in weeks, lightened his burdens. After being taken into custody, Braxton was transferred to a federal holding facility. The reality of his predicament weighed on him like a physical burden. Gone was the arrogant swagger he had displayed on the roadside when confronting Dawson. In its place stood a frightened man facing the consequences of his crimes. His lawyer arrived, looking grim after consulting the charges against his client. Extortion, conspiracy, corruption, all with potential sentences that could stretch well beyond a decade. Braxton sat in silence as the attorney laid out the slim options. He could cooperate with the government in the hopes of a reduced sentence, or he could fight, which seemed futile given the mountain of evidence. In another section of the facility, Vince Corliss and Donovan Pierce sat in separate interrogation rooms, each weighed down by their own bleak prospects. The FBI offered them deals in return for testimony, but whether any would choose to cooperate remained to be seen. News began to trickle out, local stations leading with the headline, "Fairfax County Officer among several arrested in major corruption ring." They didn't mince words about the significance, and within hours, the story permeated national networks. Meanwhile, the FBI maintained a careful stance, releasing only the barest details. For Braxton, the final blow came when he saw the footage of his confrontation with Dawson replayed in a news clip. There he was, gun drawn, furious and unhinged, a stark symbol of betrayal of his oath to protect and serve. As a prison guard led him away, Braxton felt the crushing weight of karmic retribution bearing down. He had gambled on the wrong side of the law, and now he was paying the price. In the days that followed, Dawson found himself at the center of a media maelstrom. He held a brief press conference, carefully orchestrated, to address the arrests. Standing at a podium with the FBI seal behind him, he delivered a statement emphasizing the dedication of law enforcement officials who root out corruption, even when it appears among their own ranks. Though questions about his personal ordeal surfaced, Dawson answered cautiously, "My experience underscores the fact that no one is above scrutiny, and no one is beyond accountability," he said, choosing his words to preserve respect for the thousands of honest officers serving their communities. Behind the scenes, he provided statements to the Fairfax County Police Department's ongoing internal review. Captain Martinez, visibly relieved that the scandal was being purged from her ranks, cooperated fully. Officer Hayden, lauded for her quick intervention that day, received commendations and found herself an unlikely hero to the public. Yet for Dawson, the ultimate gratification came from knowing that an organized network of corruption had been dismantled. The personal trauma of having a gun pressed against his back lingered, but each day he found solace in the knowledge that justice had triumphed. He took a few days off to spend with Caroline, who gently reminded him that even the strongest need time to recover. They walked along the Potomac River, watched the sunset, and let the swirl of headlines fade into the background. Soon, Dawson would be back to his demanding schedule, but he carried a renewed sense of purpose. Enforcing the law didn't merely mean investigating criminals at a distance. Sometimes it meant living through the danger personally to protect the greater good. Over the ensuing months, the case advanced to federal court. Braxton, Corliss, Pierce, and their co-conspirators found themselves under intense legal scrutiny. Witness testimony, bank records, and wiretap evidence painted a damning portrait of a sprawling operation that exploited corruptible officers to extort money from unsuspecting citizens. Braxton took a plea deal, confessing to his role and testifying against his former associates. The once defiant officer revealed that Vanguard Security Consultants was a front for laundering funds collected from illegal stops, and that Donovan Pierce orchestrated it all. Corliss served as the enforcer, ensuring compliance and punishing disloyalty. Braxton was merely a cog in the machine, one of several officers on the take. In a dramatic moment on the witness stand, Braxton recounted the day he stopped Dawson, his voice trembling. He admitted that in his state of heightened paranoia, he had been scanning for any opportunity to collect a payoff or pin false charges on an unsuspecting driver, unaware that he was dealing with the FBI director. Braxton looked visibly shaken as he delivered his testimony, perhaps truly realizing for the first time the depth of his mistake. The jury's reactions were palpable. Gasps rippled through the gallery as Braxton detailed the extortion scheme. Video evidence sealed the deal. When final arguments concluded, the judge handed down heavy sentences. Pierce received over 20 years in federal prison, Corliss slightly less. Braxton, due to his cooperation, received 10 years, but nothing could erase the shame of his betrayal. For law-abiding officers and citizens alike, the outcome was a sobering reminder that corruption can lurk anywhere. It also affirmed that accountability remains a cornerstone of American justice, no matter how powerful or hidden the perpetrators think they are. With the trial concluded and justice served, life gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Fairfax County Police underwent departmental reforms, implementing stricter oversight and additional training to rebuild public confidence. Officer Hayden's leadership potential was recognized, and she was promoted to a supervisory role, ensuring that her level-headed approach would guide future recruits. Dawson, too, moved forward. His duties as FBI director called him to tackle fresh crises, cybersecurity threats, terror investigations, and high-stakes negotiations with lawmakers over surveillance policies. Yet, he often reflected on the day he was pulled over, the muzzle of a gun pressing into his back. Strangely enough, that harrowing moment became a catalyst for change, one that uprooted a deep-seated criminal enterprise. In a closed-door meeting with top advisors, Dawson summarized the incident. "We were lucky," he admitted. "It could have ended in tragedy, but it didn't. And because of that, we exposed something that might have otherwise stayed hidden for years." His team nodded solemnly. Each recognized that they had emerged from a crucible of danger and uncertainty, forging new alliances and reaffirming the values they swore to uphold. As they broke the meeting, the sense of accomplishment was tinged with humility, an awareness that vigilance must never waver, for corruption thrives in the shadows of complacency. Months after the dust had settled, Dawson received an invitation to speak at a community forum in Fairfax County, an event focused on strengthening trust between citizens and law enforcement. He hesitated at first, recalling the traumatic memory of being unlawfully detained in that very jurisdiction. But eventually he accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to highlight lessons learned. On the day of the forum, the venue, a local high school auditorium filled with officers, community leaders, and curious residents. Captain Martinez delivered opening remarks, acknowledging the recent scandal, then introduced Dawson. Stepping onto the stage, Dawson saw faces filled with anticipation and concern. He began by recounting the incident, though not in lurid detail, focusing instead on the importance of accountability, transparency, and mutual respect between police and the communities they serve. "Fear and mistrust grow where openness is absent," Dawson stated, his voice echoing across the silent auditorium. "We are all responsible for ensuring that power is not misused and that justice remains a shield for the vulnerable, not a sword to oppress." The applause that followed was genuine. Though a few skeptics remained unconvinced, the majority recognized his sincerity. In the crowd, he caught sight of Officer Hayden, who nodded her support. Their brief eye contact acknowledged a shared mission to prevent future abuses and to safeguard the honor of the badge. Leaving the stage, Dawson felt a weight lift. The darkness of that fateful day had been transformed into a beacon for reform. Sometimes, a painful experience becomes the impetus for broader change. He hoped that was indeed the case here, in Fairfax and beyond. As for Officer Anthony Braxton, his decade-long prison sentence would be spent reflecting on the series of choices that led him from a promising law enforcement career to a federal inmate. Each day, he woke up to the stark reality of prison life, far removed from the adrenaline-fueled power trip that had once defined him. Word spread among inmates that he was a former cop, making his incarceration all the more perilous. He was moved into protective custody after an altercation in the yard. Little by little, the bravado drained away, replaced by regret and remorse, though whether genuine or born of survival instinct, no one could be entirely sure. For Donovan Pierce and Vince Corliss, their lengthy sentences offered ample time to contemplate the downfall that came from tangling with the FBI. No amount of ill-gotten wealth could shield them now. They stood as cautionary tales, reminders that corruption eventually devours itself. In a sense, justice wore many faces in this saga. Braxton lost his freedom and reputation. Pierce and Corliss lost their empire, and the community, though shaken, gained a renewed commitment to ethical policing. Perhaps that was karma at its purest, a balancing of scales that had been tipped too far toward darkness for too long. Back in Washington, D.C., Dawson continued his tenure as FBI director with unwavering resolve. He navigated political storms, consulted on high-profile cases, and championed policies aimed at rooting out corruption wherever it took root. If the experience taught him anything, it was that vigilance must be a shared responsibility among federal agencies, local departments, and the public at large. He also made time to decompress, joining Caroline on brief getaways when he could. Their marriage, already strong, had grown closer through adversity. Over quiet dinners, they discussed not only the present challenges but the hope for a future where trust in law enforcement could be restored, one honest officer at a time. And so, the extraordinary incident that began on a bright September morning ended with a renewed sense of purpose. Out of one man's misuse of power came a wave of reform, a reaffirmation of principles, and a testament to the unpredictability of fate. Justice, though sometimes slow, had prevailed. In the swirl of everyday life, as the world moved on to new headlines and fresh dramas, the memory of the FBI director, pulled over and held at gunpoint, remained a compelling reminder. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and a heartening story about the resilience of a system designed imperfectly but resolutely to uphold the rule of law. Thank you for joining us on this dramatic journey of power, betrayal, and redemption. We hope this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, revealing how a single spark, a gunpoint confrontation, ignited a relentless pursuit of justice. From the courageous individuals who intervened to the systematic efforts of the FBI to root out corruption, we've seen the very best and the very worst of what law enforcement can be. If you found this narrative insightful and thrilling, please remember to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories. Your support helps us continue shining a light on hidden truths and delivering unforgettable tales. Thank you.